The African sun had barely risen when the first cry shattered the stillness of the plains. It wasn't the cry of prey, it was something smaller, purer, full of pain and confusion. A lion cub, no more than a few months old, had fallen into a hunter's steel trap hidden beneath the tall grass. The sharp metal jaws clamped around his leg, tearing through fur and flesh. His name was Tambo, and his story would change the hearts of all who heard it. His mother, Asha, heard his scream echo across the valley. She ran with the force of the wind, her heart pounding like thunder. The earth beneath her paws seemed to vanish as she reached the trap, and what she saw made her freeze. Her baby, her only cub, was bleeding, the cruel steel glinting in the golden light. She roared, a sound that rolled through the land, anger, fear, and agony all at once. Birds exploded from the trees, and even the distant herds paused in silence. Asha pawed at the trap, desperate to open it, but every movement made Tambo cry harder. The cruel mechanism had no mercy. It was built for death, not release. Then, from beyond the ridge, came a sound far more terrifying than thunder, the low hum of a truck engine. Human voices followed, loud, careless, cruel. The hunters were coming back. What happened next would tear the savannah apart. A mother's battle not just for her cub's life, but for her very soul. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more stories like this. Real, emotional, and unforgettable tales from the heart of the wild. Because what this lioness did next will remind you why a mother's love is the most powerful force in nature. The morning light spread slowly across the savannah, soft and golden, brushing over every blade of grass. The air still smelled of night, cool, earthy, and full of promise. Herds of impalas grazed in the distance, their heads dipping rhythmically. Birds called to one another from acacia trees, unaware that this day would soon be marked by pain and blood. Asha walked proudly through the tall grass, her golden fur catching the light. She was one of the strongest lionesses in her pride, fierce, graceful, respected. But more than anything, she was a mother. Her cub, Tambo, trotted behind her on clumsy paws, his small tail flicking as he tried to imitate her every movement. "Stay close," Asha murmured, her deep voice carrying the tenderness of instinct. "I am," Tambo replied, his little voice full of excitement. "I can walk just like you, Mama?" She turned to smile at him, a rare expression for a creature born into a world of survival. "You will one day. But for now, you must learn to listen before you leap." Tambo puffed up his tiny chest, pretending to be brave. "I can protect you." Asha chuckled softly, her eyes warm. "And then protect me from this grasshopper," she teased, flicking a paw at a small insect that sprang from the ground. Tambo pounced clumsily, missing by a wide margin. He giggled, a sound so pure that it seemed to make the savannah itself pause for a heartbeat. The morning continued peacefully. Asha led her cub to a nearby watering hole, where they drank side by side. She watched the ripples spread across the surface and reflected for a moment on the life she was building for her son. He was her only cub that had survived the last dry season, her reason for waking, for hunting, for fighting. But as they made their way back through the tall grass, the air began to change. It was subtle at first, the shift of wind direction, the strange silence of birds that should have been calling. Asha froze, her ears twitching. "Something wasn't right, Mama," Tambo asked, lowering his head. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice low. She stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the ground. There was no visible danger, no scent of hyenas, no sign of rival lions. Just the dry, brittle smell of rust and something else, something unnatural. And then it happened, a faint click followed by a scream. Asha's world collapsed into chaos. Tambo was on the ground, his hind leg caught in a metal trap half buried in the soil. The cruel iron teeth clamped tightly around his flesh. His tiny body writhed as he cried out in pain. Asha lunged toward him with a roar that shook the air. She pawed desperately at the trap, trying to pry it open, but the steel was unyielding. Each pull made the metal creak and Tambo cry harder. Blood stained the grass beneath him. "Mama, it hurts." He whimpered, his voice cracking. "I know, my love," Asha said, her voice trembling as she bit at the steel. "Hold on, I'll get you out," but it was no use. The trap was designed by men, clever, cruel men who hunted not out of hunger but out of sport. It was meant to hold even the strongest predators, to make escape impossible. Asha's heart raced as she looked around frantically. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, to move, to protect her cub. But from what? Then she heard it, faint at first, then unmistakable. The sound of an engine. It came from the west, growing louder with each passing second. Dust began to rise on the horizon. The hunters were returning. Asha's blood ran cold. She knew what humans were capable of. She had seen them before. The long black guns, the fire that cracked from their hands, the smell of death that followed. They killed lions not for survival, but for trophies. She bent low over her cub, shielding him with her body. Her ears flattened, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Mama?" Tambo whimpered. "Quiet," she whispered. "Don't move!" But the cub's whimpers were too soft, too frightened to stop. The rumble grew louder. Asha's eyes darted toward the open plains. Through the rising dust, she saw them. A truck, green and battered, rolling slowly toward the trap. 2 men sat in the front. One drove. The other leaned out of the window, holding a rifle. Asha crouched low, her mind racing. She couldn't run, not without leaving Tambo. But if she stayed, they would kill them both. Her breath came in sharp, short bursts. She looked down at her cub, his eyes full of trust, pain, and fear, and in that instant, something inside her shifted. The fear burned away, replaced by something fierce and ancient, the kind of strength that lives in the bones of every mother who has ever faced death for her child. She pressed her nose to Tambo's face. "Listen to me," she whispered. "You are my heart. You are my roar. Whatever happens, remember that." He blinked, tears glistening in his eyes. "Don't leave me, Mama." "I won't," she said, and turned toward the sound of the truck. The engine roared closer. The men's laughter echoed through the plains. One pointed at her, shouting something in a language she didn't understand. She stood tall, her muscles coiled, her body between them and her cub. They had the guns. They had the power. But Asha had something stronger. Love sharpened into fury. As the truck came to a stop and the men climbed out, she bared her teeth and roared, a sound that split the world in two. It wasn't just a roar of warning. It was a promise that even if the savannah itself turned against her, she would not let her cub die alone. The hunters raised their weapons, the air went still, and then chaos erupted. The first shot shattered the morning. It tore through the air like thunder, echoing across the plains. Flocks of birds exploded into the sky in frantic waves. Asha ducked low, her body tensing as the bullet whizzed past her ear and tore into the dirt behind her. Dust sprayed her face. The hunters shouted to one another, their voices sharp and mocking. "There she is! Don't let her get close!" one yelled. The other laughed, slapping the side of the truck. "We've got her now!" But they underestimated her. Asha's eyes burned with fire. Her muscles coiled beneath her skin as she crouched, her tail twitching once before she sprang forward. She moved like lightning, a flash of gold against the green of the grass. The men barely had time to raise their rifles again. She hit the side of the truck with her full weight, the impact shaking the metal and knocking one man off balance. He stumbled backward, tripping over a coil of rope and falling to the ground with a cry. His gun clattered into the mud. The second hunter aimed, but she was faster. Her claws raked across his arm as she lunged past him, forcing him to drop his weapon. She turned, snarling, teeth bared, saliva flying. Her roar tore through the air, not the warning of a hunter, but the scream of a mother defending her child. The man on the ground scrambled for his rifle. "Shoot her!" he shouted. The standing one backed away, clutching his bleeding arm. "She's mad! She's lost it!" Mad. Yes, mad with fear, with grief, with love. Asha lunged again. Her paw struck the rifle just as the man pulled the trigger, sending the bullet wide. The gun went spinning into the grass. The recoil knocked him off his feet. For a brief, fierce moment, the lioness stood victorious, chest heaving, eyes blazing, her roar echoing into the distance, but she had no time to celebrate. Behind her, Tambo whimpered, a small, broken sound that turned her triumph into dread. She turned, and her heart nearly stopped. The cub was still trapped, his leg twisted unnaturally in the metal jaws. His fur was stained with blood. Every second she fought had cost him more pain. She ran back to him, lowering herself beside the trap. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here." Tambo's little body trembled. "Mama, I can't move." I know, baby." She pressed her head against his, licking his face. "You're so brave, so strong. Just hold on." But as she tried once more to pry the trap open with her claws, the sound of movement behind her froze her in place. The man she had attacked was crawling toward his rifle. His face was twisted with rage. He spat blood, muttering curses, his hand reaching for the weapon. Asha turned, her eyes narrowing. She stepped in front of Tambo again, blocking his view. The man raised the gun. His hand shook from pain, but his voice was steady. "You think you're brave, beast. Let's see how brave you are now." Asha crouched low, ready to spring. She knew she couldn't reach him in time. The distance was too great, the gun too fast. But she also knew something else. He would not touch her cub. Then, a sound neither of them expected. A low growl came from behind the truck. The man froze, his eyes darting toward the sound. From the tall grass emerged another lion. Larger, older, his mane dark and heavy. It was Baraka, Asha's mate, Tambo's father. He had followed her scent since dawn, tracking the distant echo of her roars. His eyes locked onto the man, cold and merciless. Baraka roared, a sound so deep it made the ground tremble. The hunter fired wildly, but the bullet only grazed the lion's shoulder. It was the last shot he managed to take. Baraka was on him in an instant. The man screamed once before silence swallowed the world. The truck door slammed shut as the second hunter scrambled inside, flooring the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, tires spinning through the mud before vanishing into the horizon, trailing dust and fear behind it. Then, at last, there was quiet. Baraka stood panting, his massive chest rising and falling. Blood trickled down his shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on Asha and their cub. She turned to him, trembling. "He's hurt," she whispered. "The trap won't open." Baraka stepped closer, examining the steel. He bit down on it, his muscles straining, but the jaws wouldn't budge. His frustration grew. He struck the trap with his paw, but it barely moved. Tambo whimpered again. "Papa?" Baraka looked down at him and growled softly, not in anger, but in sorrow. "Be still, little one." Asha paced around the trap, desperate, her mind racing. She could see the cub weakening, his eyes half closed, his breathing shallow. If they didn't free him soon, the bleeding would take him. "There must be a way," she whispered. "There has to be." Baraka looked up toward the horizon, his jaw tight. "The humans built this," he said. "Only they can open it." Asha turned on him, fury flashing in her eyes. "Then we will find them." "They will kill us," he said. "You saw what they do." "I don't care," she snarled. "I will not lose him." Her roar shook the trees. Baraka hesitated, his gaze shifting from his mate to their cub. He saw the love burning in her, the same fire that had once drawn him to her, the fire that made her unstoppable. Finally, he nodded. "Then I go with you." She looked up, startled. "You would?" He pressed his head against hers, a silent vow passing between them. "We save him together, or not at all." As the sun climbed higher, they began their journey. Asha carried Tambo gently in her jaws, careful not to touch the mangled leg. Baraka walked ahead, following the smell of gasoline and blood. The trail of the hunters cut deep into the plains, their scent fresh and vile. Behind them, vultures circled, over the empty trap, waiting for death that would never come. Ahead of them, The savannah stretched vast and cruel, but within its heart walked two lions bound by a single purpose. And though the cub whimpered softly with every step, there was something fierce in his eyes, as if, even in pain, he believed in them, as if he already knew that love, once awakened, was stronger than steel, but the journey would cost them more than they could imagine, because the closer they came to the hunter's camp, the closer they came to a truth no parent should ever face. That sometimes even the greatest love cannot protect you from the cruelty of the world. The midday sun burned mercilessly over the savannah, turning the world into a shimmering sea of gold. The air rippled with heat, and each breath Asha took felt like fire in her lungs. Yet she didn't stop, not once. Her paws were raw and bloodied from the rough terrain, but her determination burned brighter than pain. In her jaws, Tambo lay limp but alive. His small body trembled with every movement, his fur sticky with blood and dust. Every few steps, Asha felt the weight of him grow heavier, not because he was large, but because he was fading. Baraka led the way, his mane soaked with sweat and his injured shoulder dripping crimson. The bullet wound wasn't deep, but it slowed him. Still, he didn't complain. He had always been a lion of few words, a leader who spoke with strength, not sound. But now his silence was different. It was fear. "How far?" Asha asked, setting the cub down for a moment to rest. Her voice was low, rough with exhaustion. Baraka turned his head toward her, his amber eyes full of worry. "They stopped near the river," he said. "I can smell the fuel, the metal, the stench of death." Asha looked toward the horizon, where faint black smoke curled into the air. It wasn't a wildfire. It was human, the kind that burned for greed. She nuzzled her cub gently, her breath shaky. "Hold on, my son," she whispered. "Mama's here." Tambo's eyes fluttered open. It hurts, Mama. "I know, my heart," she said softly, licking the side of his face. "But you're strong. You were born to survive." The cub's breathing steadied slightly, soothed by her voice. Baraka stepped closer. "They'll kill us if they see us," he said. "You know this." Asha met his gaze, defiant. "Then they'll have to try." Baraka studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We wait until nightfall," he said. "We use the dark." Asha agreed, though every minute felt like an eternity. As the sun sank lower, they found a small patch of shade under a cluster of thorn trees. The wind carried the distant hum of engines and the faint metallic clang of tools. The hunters were close, too close. Asha lay beside her cub, her body curved protectively around him. She could feel his shallow breaths against her chest, each one like a fading heartbeat. She pressed her nose to his fur, inhaling deeply, as if memorizing him. His scent, his warmth, his innocence. Baraka stood a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "When this is over," he said quietly, "we'll take him north, where there are no men." Asha closed her eyes. "If he lives." "He will," Baraka growled, his voice firm, as if daring the world to defy him. Darkness crept slowly across the plains. When the first stars appeared, the lions began to move again. The night air was cooler, carrying the distant smell of smoke and roasted meat. Asha's stomach turned. She knew what that smell meant. The hunters weren't just trapping animals, they were eating them. Baraka moved ahead, lowering himself as they approached the camp. The flicker of firelight danced across the dry grass. They stopped behind a large fallen log and peered through the brush. There it was, the hunter's base. 2 tents, a truck, and a fire burning in the center, surrounded by 3 men. Their rifles leaned against a crate nearby. The sound of laughter drifted into the air, harsh, ugly, inhuman. Asha's eyes narrowed when she saw it, a pile of animal skins beside the fire. Leopard, antelope, and lion. Her chest tightened. The smell of blood was overwhelming. Timbo whimpered softly behind her, too weak to make a sound. Asha turned and pressed a paw gently over his muzzle. "Shh," she whispered. "It's all right." Baraka's tail flicked. "We'll have one chance," he murmured. "Get in, free him, and get out." Asha shook her head. "No, I'll go alone. You stay with him." Baraka's ears flattened. "You can't." "I have to," she said. "If something happens to me, he still has you." He stared at her, torn between reason and love. Finally he bowed his head. "Then move like the wind, my queen." Asha's heart pounded as she crept toward the camp. Every sound as every step fell deafening in her ears. The hunters laughed louder, drinking from metal cups, oblivious. She moved closer, crouching behind a tent. The trap that held her cub still lay in the back of the truck, smeared with blood. She could smell it, iron and rust. Next to it sat a heavy metal box filled with tools, wires, and something shiny. Keys. Her pulse quickened. She stepped forward silently, her muscles tight. Her paw brushed against a discarded can, and it rolled. The nearest hunter froze. What was that? Asha went still, her entire body tensing. The man stood, squinting into the darkness. Another laughed. "Probably a jackal." "Jackal my ass," the first said, grabbing his rifle. "I'll check it out." Asha's breath quickened. She couldn't wait. She leapt. Her roar split the night open. The man had no time to scream. She hit him like a boulder, knocking the gun from his hands. The other two shouted, stumbling to their feet. Shots rang out, flashes of fire lighting the camp. Asha ducked low, her claws slashing through one man's leg. He screamed, falling backward into the fire. The flames burst upward, sparks flying. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The last hunter raised his rifle, aiming straight at her. But before he could shoot, a roar answered hers, deep, thunderous. Baraka. He charged into the camp like a storm, his mane glowing orange in the firelight. He struck the man hard, sending him crashing into a pile of crates. Asha turned toward the truck, ignoring the chaos. She jumped onto the back, grabbed the trap in her jaws, and yanked. The metal bent slightly, but it was still locked. She spotted the key dangling from the box, grabbed it carefully in her mouth, and dragged it back to Tambo. Baraka stayed behind, fighting the last man, a blur of fury and flame. Asha reached her cub, panting, and set the trap down. She tried to fit the key in, fumbling, biting, twisting, until suddenly, click, the jaws sprang open. Tambo was free. Asha nuzzled him frantically, tears stinging her eyes. "You're free, my son. You're free." But the moment of relief was shattered by a single deafening gunshot. Asha's head snapped toward the camp, and what she saw made her scream. Baraka stood in the firelight, blood spreading across his chest. The last hunter, dying but defiant, had fired one final shot. Baraka stumbled, his eyes meeting hers, calm, fierce, unafraid. Then he fell. The world went silent, and Asha knew the fight was not over yet. The hunters had taken everything from her. Now the savannah would take everything from them. The fire crackled in the distance, its glow flickering against the horizon like the beating heart of the savannah. Smoke rose into the dark sky, twisting and curling until it merged with the blood-red moon above. Asha stood frozen, her gaze locked on the body lying beside the flames. Baraka, her mate, her protector, her strength. The sound of his fall still echoed in her mind. Tambo whimpered behind her, his voice weak, trembling. "Mama, Papa's not moving." Asha's throat tightened. She turned toward her cub, his small frame trembling beside the open trap. His leg was free, but the wound was deep, the fur around it sticky with blood. She wanted to run to him, to comfort him, but her body refused to move. Her eyes stayed fixed on Baraka. He lay on his side, his mane matted with dirt and firelight, his powerful chest still. The hunter who had shot him now sat slumped against a crate, barely breathing, a look of stunned disbelief frozen on his face. The rifle lay in the mud empty. For a long moment everything was still. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of the grass in the wind. Asha finally moved. She stepped forward slowly, her muscles trembling, her claws digging into the earth with each step. The hunter looked up at her, his lips trembling. "Stay back," he gasped, reaching weakly for his weapon. She didn't stop. Her eyes, golden, wet with grief, burned like coals. She reached him before he could lift the rifle. One paw came down on his chest, pinning him easily. His breath hitched, his face twisted in fear. "Monster," he whispered. Her ears flattened. For a moment she hesitated, not because she pitied him, but because she remembered Shira's face, the hyena who had once shown mercy when none was deserved, the one who had saved her cub and paid with her life. The memory flickered through her like lightning. But mercy was for the innocent, and this man had stolen more than lives. He had stolen peace. Her roar shook the night, echoing across the plains. The animals nearby scattered into the darkness as she struck. The fire hissed louder, its sparks swirling into the sky like spirits ascending. When the world fell silent again, the hunter's screams were gone. Asha stood over his body, panting. The weight of her grief pressed against her chest until it hurt to breathe. She turned back toward the fire, where Baraka's body lay motionless. Slowly she approached him, each step heavier than the last. "Baraka," she whispered. "My king." She pressed her head against his mane, her tears soaking into his fur. The scent of him, the warmth of his strength, was already fading. Tembo limped closer, dragging his injured leg. His small voice cracked. "Mama, can we wake him?" She looked at him, her heart breaking all over again. "No, my son," she said softly. "He's gone to guard the stars." The cub's lower lip quivered. "Like the hyena?" Asha closed her eyes. "Yes, like her." The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of rain and ash. In the distance, thunder rumbled, faint and far away. It was as if the sky itself was mourning. Asha lowered herself beside Baraka, resting her body against his one last time. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You saved us." When dawn began to rise, she finally stood. She turned to her cub, who had fallen asleep against her leg, his breathing slow but steady. He looked so small, so fragile, and yet he was all that was left. "We have to go," she said gently. "The men will come back." She took one last look at Baraka.
"I'll tell him your story," she whispered.
"Every night he'll know who his father was." Then she lifted Tambo gently by the scruff and carried him into the fading night. The savannah was waking when they reached the river. The first light of dawn glowed across the water, turning it into molten gold. Birds began to sing. Life moved on, as it always did. Asha laid her cub on a soft patch of grass. He stirred weakly, opening his eyes to the sunrise. "It's beautiful," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "Your father loved the mornings." The cub nodded, his eyes half closed. "Can we rest, Mama?" "Yes," she said softly. "Rest, my brave one. You're safe." He drifted to sleep, his small chest rising and falling. Asha turned her gaze to the horizon. In the distance, smoke still rose from the hunter's camp. But the wind was changing, carrying the scent away, carrying the memory of blood and fire into the past. She watched as vultures circled the place she had left behind. They would erase all traces soon, as the savannah always did. Life would devour death until only stories remained. When the sun climbed higher, she lay beside her cub, wrapping her body protectively around him. The warmth of the morning sun covered them both like a blessing. For a while there was peace, but peace in the wild never lasts. From the far hills, a new sound rose, the distant growl of engines. More men, more death. Asha's eyes opened slowly. She didn't move, not yet. She watched the horizon, her expression calm, almost regal. She had lost too much to fear them anymore. If they came, she would face them. But for now, she let herself rest beside her son. The light danced over them, mother and cub, shadow and sun. And somewhere, in that soft border between earth and sky, she imagined Baraka watching. She imagined his proud eyes, his deep voice rumbling like thunder, saying the words she needed to hear most. "You did well, my queen." Asha lifted her head and looked at her sleeping son. "We'll go north," she whispered. "To the mountains where no men go. There you'll grow strong. You'll lead with heart, not hate." The cub stirred slightly, his tail twitching. "Papa will be proud," he murmured in his dreams. "Yes," she whispered. "He already is." The wind picked up again, gentle and warm, carrying away the last traces of smoke. And when the sun finally rose high above the plains, its light touched every corner of the savannah, the rivers, the trees, the dens of prey and predator alike. Life began again, but beneath that endless sky, the lions would remember. They would remember the mother who defied death, the cub who survived, and the king who fell so they might live. And when the rains came again, turning the earth green, the blood would wash away, but the legend would remain. The legend of Asha, the lioness who roared against the cruelty of man and of Baraka, who met his end beneath a blood moon, but lived forever in the hearts of his kind. And every time thunder rolled across the plains, it would sound like their voices together, love and loss, forever echoing through the wild. Seasons changed. The scars of that bloody night faded under layers of new grass, rain, and time. But some wounds never truly healed. Asher and Tambo had traveled far north, beyond the stretch of plains where the poachers once hunted. The savannah there was different, wilder, quieter, untouched by man. Rolling hills dotted the horizon, and acacia trees grew tall like ancient guardians. Herds of zebras grazed peacefully, unaware of the grief carried by the lioness who watched them from afar. Tambo had grown. His limp was still there, a subtle hitch in his stride, but he no longer cried from pain. The wound on his leg had healed into a twisted scar that marked him forever, a reminder of survival, not weakness. His mane began to grow in, soft and golden, like his father's had been. He was strong now, but his eyes carried something no cub should bear. Every night Asher told him stories of Baraka, of the pride they once had, of the way his father stood between life and death to save them. She spoke of courage and of love, and of how even the wildest storms must pass. And every night Tambo listened, silent and wide-eyed, memorizing every word. But one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in crimson and gold, Tambo spoke. "Why do men hunt us, Mama?" he asked softly. Asha paused, her heart sinking. "Because they fear what they don't understand," she said. "And because they have forgotten how to live with the earth, not against it." Tambo looked toward the distance where smoke once rose, his small chest rising with determination. "Then I'll remind them," Asha smiled sadly. "You can't change their hearts, my son." "Maybe not all," he said, "but maybe some." She didn't argue. Deep down, she knew that fire, the one she once saw in Baraka's eyes, now burned in their son. Days passed, and Tambo grew restless. He began venturing farther from their resting place, testing his strength. He chased birds and stalked shadows, his limp barely noticeable now. Asha watched with pride, though her chest ached with fear every time he disappeared beyond her sight. One morning he returned with something clenched in his jaws, a metal tag, dull and rusted. Asha froze. "Where did you find that?" "By the river," he said. "It was buried near the roots of a tree." She stepped closer. The tag was old, scratched with faint letters, barely visible in the light. It smelled of oil, blood, and memories. Tambo dropped it, his eyes hard. "It belonged to them, didn't it? The men who hurt Papa." Asha nodded slowly. He looked up at her, his voice trembling. "Then they're still out there," Asha sighed. "Perhaps. But that's not our fight anymore, Tambo." His tail lashed. "It should be." That night, as the stars spread across the sky like sparks from the past, Tambo couldn't sleep. He lay awake beside his mother, listening to the wind whisper through the grass. Every sound felt alive with purpose, the rustle of the leaves, the distant cry of hyenas, the steady pulse of the land itself. He rose quietly and padded toward the edge of the clearing. The moonlight painted his golden fur in silver. He looked back once at his mother, sleeping peacefully, her body curled protectively even in rest. "I'll make him proud," he whispered. The next morning Asha awoke to find her son gone. His scent lingered on the breeze, leading south, back toward the lands they had left behind. Panic tore through her chest. "Tambo!" she called, her voice echoing across the plains. "Tambo!" No answer. She began to run, following his tracks, her paws pounding the earth. The fear in her heart grew with every step. She could feel the sun climbing higher, burning away the morning mist, exposing every shadow, every danger. After hours of searching, she found him, standing at the edge of a wide river, the same river that once carried the scent of death and gasoline. "Tambo!" she roared. He turned, startled. "Mama!" her voice broke. "What are you doing here?" He looked down at the tag hanging from his jaws. "I needed to see where it ended," he said quietly. Where he fell, Asha's anger melted into sorrow. She stepped forward, pressing her head against his. My son, some memories are not meant to be reopened. He shook his head. I had to. Before she could answer, the wind shifted, and with it came a new sound. The low hum of an engine. Asha froze. Tambo's ears perked. Mama, what is that? Her eyes widened. Run, but it was too late. From behind the trees, a vehicle emerged, newer than the one from years ago, its metal body glinting under the sun. 3 men stood in the back, rifles slung across their shoulders. Poachers. Again. Asha pushed her son behind her, her body tensed, her tail low. The memories flooded back, the gunshots, the fire, the blood. The men laughed when they saw her. Well, look what we have here, one said, raising his weapon. A big one and a cub. Easy money. Asha growled low, her eyes locked on them. Tambo trembled behind her. Mama, no! The first shot fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, and she roared in pain but didn't fall. She leapt forward, fury driving her faster than thought. The second shot missed. The third hit her side. Tambo screamed. Asha staggered but didn't stop. She slammed into the side of the truck, her claws tearing through metal and flesh. One man fell, screaming as she struck again. Another swung his rifle like a club, hitting her face, but she bit down on the barrel, snapping it in 2. Blood poured from her wound, but she fought like the queen she was, like Baraka had taught her. Then she heard Tambo roar, his first real roar. He leapt onto the fallen man, his claws small but sharp, his fury greater than his size. The man tried to shove him off, but the cub bit down hard on his arm, refusing to let go. The third man jumped off the truck, fumbling for his gun. Asha lunged at him, but her strength was fading. Run, Tambo, she roared. I won't leave you. Go! Their eyes met, a single heartbeat of love and terror. Then she turned and charged the last hunter with everything left in her. The two collided, vanishing into the tall grass. Tambo cried out for her, but only silence answered. The smoke cleared. The truck was overturned. One hunter lay still, another crawling away, bleeding. The grass rustled once, then went still. Tambo limped forward, blood on his fur, calling softly, Mama, but there was no reply. Only the whisper of the wind and the quiet song of the savannah, the sound of life moving on, even after tragedy. And in that silence, Tambo lifted his head to the sky and let out a roar that echoed for miles, not of victory, but of loss, and of a promise he would never break. He would live. He would remember. He would carry her roar within him forever. The sun had barely risen when the wind carried the scent of ash across the plains. It brushed through the tall grass, whispering stories of loss and courage, of life that refused to bow to death. Tambo limped slowly through the golden morning light, every step heavy, his small body trembling with exhaustion. Blood clung to his fur, now dry and dark. Behind him, the savannah was silent. The echoes of gunfire had faded, leaving only the haunting calm that follows tragedy. He stopped near the riverbank, where the water flowed slow and red with silt. The same river where his father's body had once been carried away years before. Now it reflected his mother's final stand. Asha, the lioness who had given everything so her cub could live. He looked back toward the hills, his breath unsteady. Mama, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling wind. I made it, just like you said. A flock of birds rose into the sky, their wings catching the first rays of dawn. For a moment, Tambo imagined one of them was her, strong, beautiful, free, but the illusion vanished with the wind. His leg gave out, and he collapsed by the river's edge. He pressed his paw into the soil, his claws digging into the earth as if trying to anchor himself to something real. Pain radiated through his body, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache inside his chest. He lay there for a long time, breathing shallowly, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Then faintly he heard it, the distant calls of other lions. A pride, the first he'd heard in years. He raised his head weakly. Could it be? The sound grew closer, low rumbles of curiosity and caution. Out of the tall grass emerged 2 lionesses and a large male, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. They stopped when they saw him, their eyes narrowing. The older lioness stepped forward, her posture cautious but not aggressive. "Who are you, little one?" she asked softly, her voice deep and steady. Tambo tried to rise, but faltered. "My name is Tambo," he said hoarsely. "I'm Asha's son." The lioness froze. "Asha?" she repeated, her eyes widening. She turned to the others. "The Asha? From the southern plains?" He nodded slowly. "She's gone." The lioness lowered her head. "She was a legend," she murmured. "We heard stories about her, how she fought the hunters and saved her pride." Tambo blinked, the words cutting through his grief. She saved me," he said, his voice breaking. "And my father, too. But they're both gone now." The lioness stepped closer, her gaze softening. "Then her strength lives in you." Tambo's chest tightened. "I don't feel strong," the lioness smiled sadly. "Strength isn't the absence of pain. It's what you do despite it." She gestured for him to follow. "Come, you shouldn't be alone." He hesitated, his eyes drifting back toward the horizon where the smoke still rose faintly. "I can't leave her," he whispered. The lioness turned, her expression solemn. "Your mother wouldn't want you to stay in her shadow. She'd want you to live." Tambo swallowed hard, then nodded. "All right." Together they crossed the plains, the new pride watching him silently. The young lions eyed him with curiosity, a cub scarred but unbroken. He limped among them, his heart heavy but beating stronger with each step. By midday, they reached the shade of an acacia grove. The lionesses rested, the male lay near the water, and Tambo finally allowed himself to collapse into the grass. His body ached, but for the first time in days he felt something new. Safety. He stared at the clouds above, his eyes tracing their slow drift across the endless sky. "Mama," he whispered, "I found them." The wind stirred the leaves, brushing gently against his mane, as if in answer. Days turned into weeks. The pride accepted him as one of their own. The young lions began to play with him, cautiously at first, but soon they grew bold. Tambo learned to hunt again, not as fast or as strong as the others, but with focus and patience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of amber and crimson, the elder lioness approached him. "You've come far, young one," she said, "but there's still something in your eyes, something unsettled." Tambo looked toward the setting sun. "I keep hearing her voice," he said softly, "every night when the wind moves through the grass. It tells me not to forget." The lioness nodded. "And you shouldn't. But remember, to honor her, you must live for her, not die in her memory." He lowered his head, tears welling in his eyes. "She gave everything for me. And now," the lioness said gently, "you must give everything for something greater, the future." That night, under the vast canopy of stars, Tambo stood alone on a hill. The moon hung low and golden, the same color as his mother's eyes. He closed his own, breathing deeply, the scent of the savannah filling his lungs, grass, dust, and life. He remembered her roar, fierce and full of love. He remembered Baraka's strength, Shira the hyena's sacrifice, and every creature who had crossed his path to teach him what survival truly meant. He opened his eyes, and then he roared. It started low, a rumble deep in his chest, then grew, louder, wilder, echoing across the plains. It carried through the trees, across rivers, and into the hills. Every creature paused to listen. Antelopes, elephants, hyenas, and even distant birds stopped mid-flight. It wasn't a roar of power. It was a roar of remembrance, a roar for every life lost to cruelty, every mother who fought, every cub who survived, a roar for Asha. When the echoes finally faded, Tambo felt something shift inside him, not the weight of loss, but the warmth of legacy. He looked at the stars and smiled through his tears. "You're with me," he said. "Always." Far away, thunder rolled over the horizon, soft, deep, familiar. It sounded like Baraka's voice. And as the pride settled for the night, Tambo lay among them, his head resting against the earth that had taken so much, yet still gave life. Tomorrow, he would rise again, not just as a survivor, but as a leader. Asha's blood ran in his veins, and her courage lived in his heart. He closed his eyes, the night wrapping around him like his mother's embrace. In the quiet of the savannah, under the moonlight, the legend of Asha and her cub continued, not in whispers or stories, but in the steady, unbreakable heartbeat of the wild. And somewhere, carried on the wind, a soft voice seemed to answer, "You did well, my son." If this story moved you, remember, courage and love live on through every life they touch. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in the strength of the wild and in the power of a mother's heart that never truly fades.